It's great to talk to Jason. And first of all, I thought it'd be good if you could just tell people a little bit about SAI Global and the kind of work that you're doing.
Sure. So I mean, SAI, we're in the risk management business, and the word global in our title obviously tells you a little bit that we are a global company. And without getting into too much detail, the SA stands for Standards Australia, and that's where we started. We started selling standards to companies that they needed to adhere to during the Australian mining boom, really. And really our product portfolio has expanded from that, and we also do auditing and certification services. So effectively we're saying these are the standards you must adhere to as a company. We're saying we'll also come in and we'll audit you against those standards, and we'll certify you if you reach the appropriate level. But obviously there's a key gap in the middle there, and that gap is all about how do we actually help our companies, our clients, get their employees able to pass the audits, to meet those standards and be certified. And a lot of what we do, a significant proportion of that, is all around compliance and ethics training. So that's very much a key service for us.
And how many, so what kind of audiences are we talking about?
We're talking about anybody who works for any multinational global company anywhere. And we probably have 300 to 400 clients. We train in the region of 5 to 6 million learners every year. And we translate into over 40 languages. So in all our dealings with Brightwave, we keep saying scale, scale, scale. That's one of our big challenges. But really it does give us this very interesting insight into what's going on in the broader compliance world.
Yeah, so you've got the challenges you face are sort of on a larger scale to any individual enterprise. And tell me a little bit about how the compliance, the sort of compliance environment has been changing and how that's affected the ways that you're doing the kind of training that you're supplying.
Yeah. I think compliance is going through significant change. I mean, compliance started out really, following the Enron scandal and the WorldCom and Tycos and these big, white-collar crime incidents, from the late 90s and the early noughties. And really what clients needed was a solution to make sure that kind of thing didn't happen to them. And the focus very much came down onto what was termed defensibility. It was about defending yourself against the regulator. And training was seen as being one of the easy, quick, efficient, and most importantly, auditable ways of doing that. So, this monster called compliance training was born. And, I've been talking to clients for years about this, and the kind of language they use is like inoculation. We do our compliance training to get our shots. And really, what our clients are really looking for is an audit trail of evidence. They want to create this data that they can present to regulators and say, look, everybody who has done this training, and therefore the people who did actually do the wrong thing and got caught, they're one bad apple and it's not a cultural problem. And for 10, 15 years, that kind of worked for them. The trouble is, for us as employees, it meant we were kind of subject to compliance learning for a while. But the secret is, to be honest, it wasn't really about us. The reality, it wasn't about learning as such. It was all about, defensibility. And from an instructional design perspective, I joined SAI 6 years ago, as an instructional designer, because obviously compliance is the rock and roll of instructional design, I think. And I kept on asking, why aren't we doing anything more engaging, more inspiring? Why aren't we actually trying to change the way our learners actually behave in their jobs? And I was always told compliance learning is different. Don't worry about it. And it took a while really to kind of understand, that actually it was about being content-centric. It was about, we work with lawyers, we work with general counsels, compliance officers, and really they want to know, does my course cover this, and this? Does it address this particular law? Despite the fact that even if it does, no one's going to remember it 30 seconds after they finish the training. So that's kind of where we've been, and to be brutally honest, we've made a lot of money out of it over the last 10, 15 years. But things are changing. And
what's changing then?
Yeah.
I mean, we've been talking about what's changing from the learner point of view. Is it the pressure from the learners?
In part, but I think the most important thing, you look at some of the events in the news recently. There's a certain car company who's had a few problems recently. They probably had very good compliance training. for a long time. But ultimately, that's not actually done much good, it seems. FIFA is another example we've all probably heard of, who've also invested in compliance training, our banking industry as well. And effectively what's happened is that business objective for generating an audit trail of evidence, inoculation, that's evolved now. And that's still important. Clients still want that. That's their protection, that's their safety net. But what they're starting to realize is that actually, we need to change the way that people think about the compliance risk areas. We need to change the way people behave in their jobs. In other words, we kind of want this stuff to work now, and that's quite a big step forward. And that, anecdotally, that's kind of what was coming out. And as Kara says, we've been engaging with our business for years, really trying to tease out and get to a point where we can actually start implementing some significant change. So, we've worked with Baker McKenzie, for example, and a global survey. What we did with them, it highlighted, today the overwhelming primary driver for compliance programs is brand reputation,
right?
And it's taken over from defensibility, and that is critical. Did all the compliance training that Volkswagen have been doing recently, has that actually protected their reputation? Not at all. FIFA, another example, I keep coming back to. And clients are counting the cost of reputational damage. We live in a much more transparent world today. So now they're coming to us and saying we want our defensibility, but we also want it to work. So therefore, as a learning designer, this job suddenly got really interesting, because suddenly I actually have to change people's behavior. You actually have to make it
effective in terms of the behavior changes.
Exactly. And the other interesting thing is regulators themselves are also changing their view on this. Regulators have been shown the most beautiful paper programs for years and years. They're not working. And regulators are saying, this paper program looks great, you've got everybody through hours and hours of training, but how come this still happens? So our clients very much are waking up to that change. And
so the pressure's coming from the regulators as well as the companies themselves wanting to protect themselves. And then you have kind of learner expectations as well.
Absolutely.
And does that feel like that's kind of global, or are there particular differences between different parts of the globe?
It's a very good question, because as you say, we are a global company, and we do operate we've got an enormous operation in North America, which is a very highly regulated part of the world, and obviously in EMEA as well, and APAC. What we've found is its clients in the EMEA regions have really been the drivers behind this. These are the clients who've been saying defensibility is all good, but this stuff needs to work. We need people to change the way that they're doing their jobs in order to protect our reputation. And one of the reasons this has been a long battle is because for a period of time in North America, the general client was still focused on defensibility, because it was seen as compliance is just some hoops you have to jump through in order to do business. And that's simply what was important. Very interesting now, just literally these last 18 months or so, we're now hearing very much the same message from North American clients as we have been from European clients.
Okay, so that's great for you as head of instructional design, because you're looking again at all the courses and the training that you're providing. So how are you changing the way that you're doing things?
Completely, I think, is the answer. I think when you take a learner-centric approach, you start thinking about the learner. And really you have to start thinking about what are the dimensions that you need to train a learner in. And compliance covers a wide range of risks, but really top of the pile is anti-bribery, data privacy, conflict of interest, information security. These are kind of really the hot topics, especially these days. So you need an approach which doesn't simply shout the law at people, which doesn't even focus exclusively on the principles, but actually starts looking behind that, saying, why is this important? So the approach that we're taking really is to move from rolling out a course on a particular topic and actually starting to look at compliance campaigns where we have a continual engagement, multiple touch points with our learners. That's not you need to do 20 hours of compliance e-learning a year, but instead is just engaging with them in short little experiences that maybe they don't even perceive as being being training or compliance training specifically. So we're kind of looking at a model, that we call PTAS, which is prime, train, apply, and sustain. And then we're looking in the 3 dimensions of attitude. Do they care? Do they care that paying a bribe is not a good thing? Do they care that abiding by their company's information security policy matters? Knowledge, do they have the knowledge? Do they have the understanding? Do they have the tools in order to comply? They may care, but they may not actually know how to comply. And then the behavior angle bit is really important. Is can they apply this to their day-to-day jobs? And how can we help them apply it to their day-to-day jobs? And that's really the starting point, for the challenge that we've got in many ways. And then the sustain piece is how do we kind of maintain that? How do we, once we've got them believing that it's important, once we've given them the information that actually helps them comply, so they can understand situations, identify red flags, know where to find the policies, understand the reporting procedures, and so on. How can we actually maintain that over a period of time? We tend to engage with clients on 3-year contracts, so it's not give everything in one go. It's how do we kind of maintain that? How do we keep that bouncing along nicely, really?
And then in terms of that campaign, because you're creating products that you're delivering for the clients, what might those individual kind of products look like?
Yeah. Well, we've got in our initial plans for this, we've got a number of really exciting projects underway which really fall into each of those categories. The prime side of things, is very much about preparing people for learning. And rather than simply saying, hey, we've just launched a new policy, what we're talking about is building tools which, short little game-like experiences which help the learners actually identify that they have a personal learning need. So short little game-like quizzes, barometer type experiences, where they come out of that going, maybe I do actually need to learn something. So we kind of create a demand, we create an appetite for what's coming. There's also the kind of attitudinal piece, which is really important. Why is bribery a bad thing? Everybody's doing it. Yeah. That's what you kind of hear, and sadly, you watch the news and you realise there's more of it going on than you thought. But traditionally, compliance e-learning has gone, the company might be fined and you might go to jail. And people go, I don't really care if the company's fined, and I've never been to jail and none of any of my friends, so why should I really worry about that? So we're trying to actually get people to look at, in the bribery example, what is the impact on society? Try to engage emotionally with them, so they actually start to think, what are the challenges? Or what, if I pay that $5 facilitation fee to get me through an airport quickly, it's doing no harm, surely. But they need to be, taught to kind of understand, well, actually, the person who's in that position is not paid very much by his government. So he actually tops up his salary, so he expects it. And if that's a doctor and your £5 is getting the preferential treatment, and someone who can't afford that £5 comes along and can't afford that, they don't get the preferential treatment, and maybe there's major issues. So it's about getting people to really think about, what's going on, what's the reason to believe this stuff is important, to address them as an individual personally, to get them to consider their own personal moral compass, really. Another example is, for example, you can, I need to dig out this research again, but apparently you can kind of track the spread of Ebola, and it spread quicker through countries which scored lower on Transparency International's corruption metrics. So, there really is a very clear impact on society that people maybe don't consider when they're just being given compliance learning that says, this is what the law says, this is what our policy says, and here's some empty threats.
And so in terms of that, you've talked about like the treating them as individuals, so appealing to things and their emotions, but are there other ways that you're trying to personalise the experience for them?
I mean, very much so. Many of the programs that we currently put our clients' employees through, might be 20 hours of compliance training.
Phew. And
it's the sheep dip. And, you do your training on all the key risk areas, you do your code of conduct training, And because we're designing for a global audience, multiple cultures, multiple languages, large, multinational organizations which have maybe different types of businesses. Currently we just give them the sheep dip, everybody gets the same thing. It wastes a lot of time.
Yeah.
5 million learners, 20 hours, that's 100 million hours of learning. If you could actually say, certain roles don't need to do most of that. So what we're looking into, and in fact some of our current products and many of the products that we've got in development actually do, is look for ways of how do we personalize the individual learning experience for people. And we're looking at that really in kind of a number of different dimensions. First of all, role and risk profiling is really important. So we're starting to ask questions about what kind of role do you fulfill, what risks might you be exposed to. Because when we've got that information, we can then start to present content that's relevant to the individual. So, if I'm a salesperson, I might get content that's relevant to the sorts of actions and activities that I go through as a salesperson, but maybe someone who works in R&D doesn't, so they won't get it. But also to do risk profiling to identify who are our high-risk learners. Yeah, there's maybe people who work in head office who will never be exposed to certain bribery situations or any bribery situations at all, whereas those in sales and procurement type roles maybe are extremely high risk. So it's enabling us also to target learning where the risk actually lies. And
how are you getting the details about their sort of profile?
Yeah. Part of that is the old-fashioned route, which is knowing somebody's in a role because that's part of the data that we receive from the client. But the trouble is people move around within roles. People have different interpretations of roles. That their roles change within a business. So we actually do a lot of diagnostics within the experiences themselves to really find out about the specific risks that employee believes that they are at risk of. So that's a very good way to actually focus things down. It also gives us the opportunity to present learning from a relevant context. And again, we build product, and the product needs to apply across all industries, across all roles. So, including on some of the projects we're working on with Brightwave, we're actually building in opportunities to say, how can we give this an oil and gas feel? How can we give this an aerospace feel? And to be able to do that efficiently as part of a customization and configuration process. The other thing that's really important, especially compliance programs, historically people have had to do the same course every year. It's not just 20 hours of learning, it's the same 20 hours, or at least 10 of them were the same as you did the previous year. It's not very motivating, apparently. So we're also looking very much into test out and pre-assessment, and actually saying, give people the opportunity to demonstrate that they understand this, give people the opportunity to show in context that they can make the right decisions, and use that as a way of focusing the learning that they receive without wasting time on something that they've already proven a level of mastery in. And again, in one of the projects we're currently working on with yourselves, we're actually saying, rather than not give them a test at the beginning to find out what they know, let's actually start placing some of that diagnostic in line. So we're actually building a course which happens to be anti-bribery related, where we taking very much a branching scenario-based learning approach. But if you can kind of demonstrate through the decisions that you make that you understand a particular area, you branch down a particular route where you receive less training on that particular topic. So we're really able to kind of bring learning experiences that used to be an hour down into the kind of 20-25 minute range, and obviously the savings in both cost and time, and as well as the learner's sanity are substantial.
I really like in terms of that solution as well, the way that you're in a story basically, and but the amount of learning you're going to receive as you go through the story depends on your journey through that story. So as you say, it's not just a test as such.
Exactly.
And in terms of the kind of technology, what kind of challenges? What do you think is the biggest challenge to delivering that sort of personalised learning for you in that context of kind of global large enterprises?
I mean, the scale is basically the challenge. It's building what is a very focused experience, for the learner, but building it in a way so that we can customize, we can configure for very different clients, to build in the opportunities for customization. So for example, there may be some guidance on the way that you should report an incident, for example. That may be an integral part of the story, but we need also to give the opportunity to our clients when we customize a version of the course for them, to make that reflect their processes. So it's always about thinking ahead. There's also the cultural piece as well. How do we actually produce something which has enough detail to make it interesting and feel relevant and credible, whilst it still works for all the regions of the world that these multinational companies work in.
And what about the LMSs in terms of where you're placing the...
Yeah. LMS is an interesting one and very much a big challenge for us, because in many respects one of the things we want to be able to do is to take some of that diagnostic activity and pre-test activity out of the courses themselves and do that at a higher level. So effectively it's about being able to build learning objects where your performance in that learning objects can influence the behavior of other learning objects. And then one of the challenges is SCORM is not really designed to do that. It's kind of against the philosophy of SCORM. And because of the scale that we work at, we have to engage with many large learning management systems, whether they're our own, I think we have 5 at the moment, or whether they're our clients' own ones. And that's, I think, where we're looking for the next big evolution in learning management, to start using standards like Tin Can and so on to really give us that ability to break open the different learning formats and to start creating programs and campaigns and courses that pull elements in from multiple places.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody's, we've come to the end of our time. We've just got a few minutes if there are any questions.
I think it sounds great, and I've not that long ago been engaged with you guys through anti-bribery and stuff, and I can confirm some of the things that you're saying there, particularly your campaign approach. So I think you should be congratulated on trying to push that mood, because it wasn't what I was expecting, if I'm honest, when I first called you up. I guess the quick question would be, in your data that you have, is the impact of what you're now doing compared to the 20 hours of stuff that you would probably be pushing 5-10 years ago? Do you have sort of like empirical data to show that that's really making a difference from your data? I know it should do, but do you have it?
Yeah. So in Europe, we have clients that we've been working with where we've been able to go through this process, and we're actually able, yes, to demonstrate that we have achieved improved results over previous approaches to doing this. We've got, I think, even a Brandon Hall Award for results on one of those projects. Certainly at an international level, a global level, this new approach that we've been championing very much from this region is now gaining traction. And in fact, some of the larger and key accounts in North America are now actually already adopting this on some kind of trailblazing projects. So we're starting to build that globally. I think we've got some good numbers locally. We're starting to build that globally now.
Hi. Do you approach the sustain part of it differently to the upfront part?
Yeah. So I think sustain. The sustain part of it is, traditionally it's been called the refresher. And the idea of the refresher is, can we give them a shorter version of the full course? And we're trying to get away from that. We're trying to build in much more personalisation, within the refresher stage of the program. And that's primarily based on mastery, but it's also about thinking, these guys have already received this training. What are the key points that we want to tease, that we want to remind, that we want to keep front of mind? And I think one bit I haven't touched on, which I'll quickly dive into a bit, is also the apply piece. Because what we're looking at with apply is getting out of this, or enhancing the standard campaign, which is very much a just-in-case learning. It's do your training so that you might need it in the future, and actually start bringing in tools, performance support tools, which really give the opportunity for learners to say, I actually need some guidance at this point in time, and I need that personalised, not just to me, but to the situation I'm in. So we've got some really exciting prototypes, and we're working with some clients on developing these further for kind of performance support apps which will analyse a situation. I might be a salesman for a pharmaceutical company and I'm about to try to sell a drug to a healthcare professional, there's some really strict regulations about what I can and can't do around things like off-label sales. So to actually have a little tool just before I go into that meeting where I say, this is the situation I'm in, and it says, whatever you do, don't do this, and make sure you do more of that. So really learning at the point of need. And this is not obviously a tool that's there for defensibility. This is very much about behavior. This is very much about reputation. So we're looking at those kind of solutions as well to really enhance the program.
One thing that we are really interested in is looking at getting stuff into people's workflows to sort of get them at the time where they are about to make a breach or have made a breach of some sort of compliance. So another example is email phishing. I was talking to John at Bank of England earlier about ways you can do that and simulate it and put fake phishing emails into people's real workflows. Have you got any experience or any sort of other examples of where you've done that or used that and then sort of giving people feedback at the time to say you shouldn't have done that, here's why?
We've worked with a number of clients on information security type projects, and actually some of the horror stories around information security today are quite terrifying. So the approach with information security that we're taking is initially the attitude is actually one of the biggest challenges, because a lot of people, myself included, will say, hey, I'm above this, I'm technically savvy. I think I probably broke most of our information security policy when I wrote our information security training course. So in many respects, attitude is the first problem. But I think in terms of actually, how do we address an issue like that, it's very much about focusing on red flags and immediate response. So the training that we do is very much around, can you spot that something, that this might be a dodgy email? Can you spot it quick enough? And can you respond in the appropriate way almost before you've thought about it? So in fact, one of the prototypes we've got in development, is literally a simulation game where you kind of have to get up a certain number of levels because you're just bombarded by all of these questions which require a response within seconds. And it's basically, here's an email, do you read, delete, or report? Yeah. And so we're really trying to build those kind of tools now where people sitting on the bus, people sitting on the train can go through this kind of very real simulation game type experience that reflects the reality of, am I spotting the red flags quick enough? But you talked about measurement, and I think measurement is also a really important aspect of what we're doing. Completions don't mean a great deal, let's be honest. So we're also looking at ways of capturing activities, transfer to workplace type activities, and building into the workflows assignments, so we can actually say, right, you've just finished a course. Yeah, you've got 80% on the test that was frankly only testing your short-term memory. So here's an assignment, which is how do you apply what you've just learned to a real project that you're working on? And then it's your line manager or somebody within the business who actually can qualify whether you've done that well enough and even score. And then we're also looking at social collaboration ways. So it's not just your manager, it's also can you collaborate with your team? Because really what we're trying to do is start conversations as well. But again, coming back to data, to actually have some data that says that Caroline's manager is happy that she's applying the information security policy in her day-to-day work and store some evidence of the fact she's doing that, it's much stronger evidence to present to a regulator, but frankly also to reassure the company that they're being safe and secure.